Thank you, Dame Eleanor. I'm delighted to follow my honourable friend, the member for East Worthing, and my right honourable and learned friend, the member for Kenilworth, who I agreed with very much. Because, of course, what we are talking about today is the answer that Margaret Thatcher gave to Dean Acheson's famous question, what is Britain's role in the world? And she was right. Our national mission is upholding the rule of law. That lesson served her and our nation exceptionally well. It gave moral legitimacy to the courageous defence of British nationals in the Falkland Islands and strength to the treaty that she signed 2 years later with China to protect British nationals in Hong Kong. Trust in the treaties allowed Margaret Thatcher to start down the road of peace in our own nation and conclude the Anglo-Irish Agreement with the then Taoiseach, Garret FitzGerald. It is recognition of our legal principles that holds our union together, and whether we celebrate the Boyne or the Rising, Robert I or Edward I, Griffith ap Llywelyn or the Black Prince, we all know that this is a civic union based on rules, not regiments, and we live together because together we consent. Prime Ministers and Taoiseach have known for decades that consent matters because one day our union may change. The Belfast Agreement envisions that possibility, and the treaty that gives Dublin a voice today could, one day, be used in reverse by Westminster. As a proud unionist, I defend international law and the treaties that we've signed because one day we may need it to protect us. The treaty that the government is negotiating today protects us as well. For 40 years, Brits have moved and lived in EU states, and many businesses continue to rely on continental connections to prosper. They need to know that what comes next will enable them to plan their lives and futures. They need the law to protect them. But the law must not just be predictable, it must be fair. And here is where I have sympathy for the government. Some in Brussels have treated these negotiations as a legal game, forgetting that their intention is to build a common future, not simply to decide the rules of membership. The simple fact that the government has felt the need to make such a blunt response to the EU's offers shows how much ministers must feel that they have failed to exert leverage at the table. The talks are fundamentally political, so could a political signal not have been sent that did not allow communist dictators in China to use our own words to mock us, or see US leaders on both sides warn us of the risks that we are running? Perhaps it was, and I'm sure that the government will be delighted to make this clear. But of course no agreement can ever be cast in stone. They are fundamentally made to enable the freedoms of peoples in countries around the world to cooperate together. Indeed, most famously, President de Gaulle made his comments on the end of treaties when he left or took France out of the NATO command structure after only 20 years. Treaties are like roses, he said. They last as long as they last. But to threaten it so soon after signing must have been a last resort. That at least is what the government is now telling us. Though the PM said he hadn't consulted the Foreign Office, surely the government must have considered the cost before taking this drastic step. Now that so much of the damage is done and has been set out in this House today, the onus is on our government to push hard for an agreement, because sadly the EU will now be able to point at us if the talks fail, and whatever we say, too many will now believe that it was we who broke the deal first, and this has put us at a disadvantage. Now, we all know the impact of a rupture will be felt very keenly in Kent, just as much as it will in Ulster. And we know now, clearly, that many of our allies are deeply concerned what a failure of statecraft could mean. With a parliamentary lock on these powers, splitting the bill into two parts and giving us the time to see if the EU really has broken faith with the deal before allowing the government to act, the Prime Minister has at least moved towards the point of reason. And he could go one step further. This government should restate what is already agreed in public and in print, that Britain will abide by the arbitration proceedings set out in the withdrawal agreement. That would turn this bill into what has been described as today by the front bench, an interim measure in case of emergency. And though it would still set out a way for Britain to be free of unfair treaties, it would at least make clear that this was only to be used in extremis. Perhaps that would go some way to restoring Britain's reputation as a regrettable second best to the removal of these clauses altogether. I recognise why the government wants this in parallel. but without accepting that the arbitration is binding, this is simply a reversal of the treaty. We need our word to count. Global Britain depends on it.
Tobias